Hi, my name is Jean Pillow, and I'm the coordinator for the Thames River Basin Partnership, and I work for the Eastern Connecticut Conservation District. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Kathleen Knight, Chris Stone, Karen Allen, and Denise Sabajo, who will be giving a presentation on the updated Stormwater Quality Manual. And I'm so excited to see so many new faces at this meeting today. And I hope everybody gets a lot out of this presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn the program over to Kathleen.
Thanks, Jean. I really appreciate it. I will bring my screen up and pester you all to make sure that it actually comes up, because you know those snafus. All right, I'm going to share. I'm going to change to presentation. Jean, would you like me to disable the subtitles, or would you like those to go?
Oh, it's fine with me if you have the subtitles. Some people may need that.
Okay, it's automatic, so I'm not. I wouldn't rely on the quality 100%. So as Jean said, we're going to give you an update on the draft manuals, plural. We did both the Stormwater Quality Manual and the Connecticut Guidelines for Soil Erosion and Sediment Control. Thank you so much for setting this up, Jean. We're very excited to start sharing this. And thank you so much to everyone who's on for adjusting your schedule to accommodate my tendency to have a lot of meetings. So with that, let's get started. What we thought we would do today, based on some of what we've heard, is give you a little bit of behind the scenes sneak peek of the development process and what we went through, what we considered, and where we landed. Then kind of go through the summary of the draft revisions for the Stormwater Quality Manual as it's posted, and similarly the summary of the draft guidelines on soil erosion and sediment control. And then I'm going to give you a kind of a summary of what we heard during the comment period and some of our intent at this point, where we will take the next steps. However, to kick this off, I'd like to hand it over to my, I want to tease her and call her my partner in crime in this. She is our fearless leader in many things, but for this particular project, she represented the Council on Soil and Water Conservation. Go ahead, Denise.
Thank you, Kathleen. And yeah, I don't mind being called your partner in crime on this particular effort. The Connecticut Council on Soil and Water Conservation that I chair is charged under state statute with looking at soil erosion sediment control. And actually, when the Connecticut Soil Erosion Sediment Control Act was passed in 1985, it was the council that helped pass that legislation. And as such, we have been working on the various guides throughout the decade. And one of the things that came to our attention was that there was a little bit of a disconnect between the soil erosion sediment control guidelines and the stormwater manual, and that we needed to fix that. So we brought that together and brought it to DEEP and said, you know, we really need to update this and do it at the same time and fix those inconsistencies between the two manuals. And then when we were looking at it, we realized how dated they were. This field changes very quickly, and as Kathleen goes through the process, I think we're getting to have a good product that can be easily updated, which is very exciting. We were able to find funding through Long Island Sound Study and to get this done. And I don't think we could have had a better leader than Kathleen. We're very pleased with the work that's happened so far and glad that we were able to kick it off. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kathleen.
Thanks, Denise. This wouldn't have been possible without the work group. And as Denise alluded to, we use this work group to really guide the entire process. As soon as we heard that we had funding from Long Island Sound Study, we gathered a group of wonderful volunteers ahead of that funding so that we could sort of data dump all our concerns and then filter down what we needed and could fit the budget to bring on engineering and technical support. We then dove deep into a data gathering and development stage where the work group and other expertise was brought in who couldn't dedicate time to the work group, but we invested time in what we called expert interviews to bring in some additional expertise and perspectives. And then Fuss and O'Neill got very busy drafting chapter after chapter, and the work group dedicated tons of time to reviewing each of those chapters individually and then collectively. And here we are today. We have recently closed the public comment period, and we're doing what I'm calling pre-outreach at this point. So from there, again, this wouldn't have been possible without the work group. This is the active members, but again, it's a short list, to be honest, to the contributions we actually received. Jean herself included. You'll see her photographs are featured in this new draft. So what was the priority in the scoping? As I said, we kind of did a data dump. We figured out everything we possibly could from lessons learned, what's gone wrong, what's been updated, what are we not using anymore. And then we had to refine it to meet the budget we had. And those priorities came out to be the following. Climate. We have in twofold. We have observed climate change since the numbers that were in the manuals, which were from as far back as the 70s. And the values now were very different. Rather than highlight primary and secondary BMPs, we really wanted a function-driven focus. And we needed permit consistency. There were a lot of permit updates since these manuals were originally written that needed to be brought up to date in these guidance documents. We also wanted to enhance LID. This is a requirement of the permits and also just a very good, useful practice. And it was kind of an afterthought as an appendix. And then, as Denise mentioned, first and foremost, better coordination between the manuals. And doing all of these priorities in a way that streamlined future updates. We didn't want to produce something that was an exhaustive list that took forever to put together and then immediately was outdated. We wanted to provide longevity to the manual, and by doing so, bring flexibility in design so that way you could always incorporate the newest science and the newest technologies. And we didn't want to lose sight of where these priorities came from. And that came from this kind of summarized list of our lessons learned. As Denise said, there was a disconnect between, and we had started to see some forgetting of during construction controls. There was a lot of concern about proprietary lists. They get really quickly outdated. So we're not going to manage one of those. We're just going to take the function and what serves best. And we've provided some links to those sources that do routinely update these kind of lists. So that way you have a reference to use that's living and moving. Then we also saw a tendency for designs to try and be one and done when it didn't really suit the site. So we were trying to refocus the design process as a whole site health. And another issue that we learned is accounting for TSS alone missed the fine fraction, and that's where the bulk of the pollutants actually lie. And again, we said flexibility. We were finding more successful implementation when there was more flexibility allowed. There's also concern as we went through this that designing bigger isn't always better, and climate updates might cause people to try to only design bigger. So we were trying to be very cautious in how we outlined the process and where you could adjust your plan to make sure you weren't just going giant to account for additional rainfall. And then again, as I mentioned, LID shouldn't be an afterthought, it should be at the forefront. And the documents themselves needed to be a little bit user-friendly since we're much more in an electronic world. If they could easily click to sections and documents and pieces, that was going to provide us with a lot of benefit. So when we downloaded all this data dump for the contractor, specifically Eric Moss and Dean Audette were kind of the leads on this project. They came back with us with specific recommendations on how they could resolve those issues and implement them. You'll see that the categories are highlighted here. And it goes into a lot more detail than this, but I didn't want to spend all day on this for you. So once we received those recommendations, we brought it back to the work group. We held 1 or 2 meetings. I forget if it was 2. It may have. I think we ended at the second one for discussing how to land on some of the recommendations. And this slide kind of gives you the category and then where we landed on the right with that verbal feedback. And then we circulated kind of a Microsoft form to give us a voting forum of sorts. And for current climate change, what we've seen since the last manual, we decided to rely on NOAA's latest data. We're not the experts in the meteorology, they are, so to link directly there was most useful. Climate change with regards to how it might change in the future, that's something we wanted to consider. The infrastructure that we set up for stormwater has a lifespan that we will see additional change, but a lot of that and the options that were there introduced a lot of uncertainty. So it's more of a conceptual guidance that we've given with regards to that. And then again, LID, bring it to the main body of the document. That was pretty much a no-brainer. BMP updates were focused on reclassing by function to give you a better idea of how they could work together, or whether they suit your site's needs. And then we added some functional classes in the soil sediment erosion and soil control document as well. And then again, addressing the concerns of TSS and the over-engineering concern where bigger isn't always necessarily better, we provided this additional option for treatment that you could assess your BMPs by the pollutant of concern, and kind of gave outlines of a minimum value you want to make sure you're hitting when you're looking at it for those pollutant specific areas. So all that feedback turned into the current drafts that you can see today at these links. We went to public comment January 26th through March 1st. They will stay available on this website through this period where we're finalizing, and ideally we want to put some updates on this webpage as well. But when they are finalized, they're going to go into their existing homes, these 3 websites that you see here, so that there's no confusion on what's currently existing. So back to the nitty-gritty of what we did propose. Again, I want to caveat this. We received a lot of great feedback, which I'll go into at the end, but some of what you see here as the summary is still kind of changing, right? We're still responding. We're still figuring out the best way to incorporate some of that feedback. So what I've given you is the 150-foot view here of what the changes were at the stormwater quality manual that were most important. Process was emphasized, right? LID first, retention, and then treatment. The BMP guidance was function focused. We got rid of primary and secondary. And then we updated standards to meet site-specific needs and provide you options, right? And then the BMP selection guidance was enhanced with two key aspects. We have for the structural piece, we have a selection flow chart, and then we have the BMP curves to assess what pollutant reductions could meet your site's needs. And then we did a redesign to the plant appendix. Rather than be an exhaustive list, which seemed very finite and limiting in a way, we went for more of a function-driven guidance. How can these plants work together to reduce your maintenance? How can these plants work together to reduce your watering needs? Or what are good companion planting? And what are good resources for those exhaustive lists, right? The USDA plant database, that's an ideal one. And then, of course, like I've said 100 times, we have new chapters dedicated solely to LID, and one dedicated to infiltration guidance, since that is the gold star of structural. So one key aspect, it's kind of a clue, So this function focused process is the layout. The layout of the manual was redone to facilitate that thinking. We back up with the basics in the first few chapters so you can do that site assessment. Where are my attributes on this site? Is there a wetland that's high value? Is there a buffer that's high value? Avoiding impacts and preserving those high quality pieces. And then we go into how those standards go through, which I'll go into more later. Low impact design, I'll go into a little more later too. Source control, pollution prevention, also a really important aspect, which I'll give you a little sneak peek of. And then overview of storm. And then 7 through 13, we're really talking about the structural pieces. And there is design guidance in 13. Stormwater management plan details, which tells you how to bring all these pieces together and the details of what you might want to put in that plan. A small bit on proprietary BMPs. We didn't want to totally exclude it so that someone would not infer they're not allowed. They are allowed. It's just a matter of we're not saying only this list. So as I said, one of the pieces we really went into was this process oriented, and standard 1 really gives you a good process of incorporating LID first. And this specifically, this is referencing non-structural LIDs. That doesn't mean structural LID is not allowed. It's just not your first line of defense here. It's in the structural pieces. You really want to look at these non-structural aspects first. And then we want to do stormwater retention, right? And then if the pieces that we cannot retain, or if you can't retain at all, you could do the 100% as well, treat. And that's where those BMP curves come in helpful to help you assess what treatment you're getting. So then standard 2 is managing that peak flow, right? You do not want to throw in a crazy flow and completely ignore this and then end up with lots of erosion. So this is in 3 pieces: peak runoff attenuation, conveyance protection, and the emergency outlet sizing. Standard 3, oh, did I say standard 3 before? I'm sorry about that if I did. Standard 3 is that critical link that we were talking about. We needed to make better connection. This is going back to that, the guidelines, what I call the SESC. You must have a plan for during construction for erosion control. And that's basically is the link back there. Another key aspect is standard 4, operation and maintenance. These are an investment, right? And if you're not maintaining these and operating these properly and then going in with a plan to do that, it's a waste of an investment because it's not going to operate or function at the way that it's intended. So standard 5 is the plan, the stormwater management plan, and it really brings all these pieces together. And that standard is really described further detail in chapter 12, so you can get kind of exactly like what kind of site designs and what kind of site maps you want to look for and those kind of things. So as I said, chapter 5 is where we really talk about LID now, specifically non-structural LID. We want to avoid, reduce, and manage. Evaluate your constraints and your opportunities. That's key, right? We want to make least disturbance is really our overall goal. And where we have assets, we really want to preserve those assets for stormwater. And then chapter 6, we go into more details about source control and pollution prevention. This table is one of the ones that was a primary focus in the update, and it gives you the practice type where it's applicable with these raindrops, and then some, what we're calling minimum requirements there to make it effective, what you really need to consider and what you need to do. And then there's additional resources in the far right link. So as I said, chapters 7 through 13 are where we get into the nitty-gritty of the structural piece, right? That's after you've done your LID piece of the flow process. You then come to these. And so one of the edits I actually would like to make to this that we're recommending is somehow putting a piece up front so that you could link back to that. So that should you automatically jump to this, you don't forget to go back to do that piece. And this process puts retention first, right? Infiltrating BMPs, and then it gives you, if you can do this, if you can't do this, all the steps that you can go and all these off-ramps you can do. And then we go to treatment without retention, and then you address peak runoff attenuation. So on to the guidelines on soil erosion and sediment control. Similarly, the chapter outline is a really big key and clue to how we want the consideration of the flow and the process to go. Unlike the stormwater quality manual, though, this was already really set up like that. So this manual didn't get the same kind of rehaul that we saw in the other one. Again, thank you, Jean. One key new aspect of chapter 2 is climate considerations. Not only is climate a consideration for the permanent structure, but if you're using, say you use the water quality storm that we have currently defined, that data ends in 2020. So if you're doing a design in 2025, it's an aspect you might want to consider, because as this gully is erosion is kind of a good example, right? If you're getting really intense rain, gully erosion goes to pretty drastic erosion in no time at all, and you have less time to correct if you're not properly planning. So chapter 3 is highlights from the control plans. We like the keep it simple, silly acronym. If your site is simple, go simple. The more complex considerations are kind of highlighted in our plan as well. And LID is also an important aspect. And chapter 5 is where we did the bulk of the updates here. They're more technical and more exhaustive than I have highlighted here, but I wanted to give you as much of a kind of a summary as I could. Some of the figures, this is one, and this is minutia, but previous figures didn't really address the root flare, and so we see a lot of covering of that area with mulch or whatnot that shouldn't be done. But the bigger updates are design storms again, climate, updated level spreader, updated other functional groups, we've got additional materials, post-storm inspection outlines, updates to seed selection and seeding times. And that kind of gives you the highlights of those two manuals as they currently exist. Again, we are in the midst of evaluating options. I provided some options for the contractor to review, and then we're going to take it back to the team and start collecting information on, you know, just in case there's hiccups that I can't foresee if I pivot in a certain way. We feel we were pretty successful in outreach for the comment period. We received over 110 comments. Some of these I grouped together because they were very similar, so they're not counted individually. There were 166 participants on the webinar, so if you attended, thank you very much. The comments were incredibly helpful. We saw this, since it wasn't a required comment period, it was more of an extension of our work group that we couldn't feasibly tackle. So the process was a success in that regard. Some of the things that we learned, there was a lot, obviously 110 comments are hard to summarize, but we needed clarity regarding the intent of the BMP curves and the simplified method that we're implementing versus some of the methods that are out there that may be causing confusion. We realized we needed clarity with regards to the water quality volume versus the water quality storm. The updated 90th percentile is the water quality storm that goes into the water quality volume equation. Then we may need some additional documentation for calculating the water quality storm. We're not sure how relevant that will be for people, but we're looking into that as well. Suggestions for additional content were pretty impressive as well. We got requests to look at cost factors a little more. We only really included that in the green roof assessment, and that's a relative one. That's one of those aspects that we had concern about getting outdated really fast and absorbing a huge portion of the budget that would have had to sacrifice these other elements you see here today. But it's not something we've forgotten about. There are other tools that happen to relate that I'm working on in other projects, which I can give you as much as I can if you would like me to regarding that. And then we heard requests for more inspectors for enforcing the maintenance piece and enforcing the follow through on the good design. We were requested to hear and see bad design versus good design. There was an error that needed to be corrected. Landscape architects and other soil experts are very important partners in this process, and these manuals are applicable to the work that they provide great expertise in. And this reference has been fixed. And then we're also asking for additional input from UConn to help assure the grass mixes are appropriate. That was one aspect I think I would like additional eyes on. So our next steps before we go into questions, we are, as I said, kind of in the pre-outreach. So that's today. Thank you, Jean, for kicking that off for us. We have a couple more webinars coming up that were requested through various forums. We plan to update the public fairly soon to let them know we appreciate the comments. We've collected them, and now we're in the contemplation phase. And at the same time as that, as I mentioned, FNO is giving us some support to make sure I'm not altering their vision too much on some of the ways they've really refined and did a lot of work to make this a success. And I don't want to undo any of that. And then we're the team here today, who I will introduce you to shortly, we're gonna come to the table and brainstorm it out and make sure we're doing what we need to do. And then we'll need to readdress this with the council through Denise, because the soil erosion and sediment control is their document, and the stormwater quality manual we need to flush through our management team. And then during this period before we go final, we started to coordinate with CLEAR for the NEMO MS4 support program to start to do some pre-outreach once we kind of know the direction we're going in, and give everyone enough time and heads up to really work this in the right way. So that said, I will briefly, if you don't mind, bug Karen Allen and Chris Stone to give a quick wave, and they were instrumental. I would be lost without them, and Denise as well. We needed a team to pull this through, and I got very lucky with a fantastic team. So I will pause there.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. I'm going to again remind everybody, if you haven't put your affiliation in the chat, that will be very helpful to me later when I'm taking attendance of the meeting. This is a really good presentation, and I hope everybody is ready to bombard Kathleen and the team with some questions. You want to raise your hand? I can call on you, or we can do it, just turn on your mic and start talking. I have a list of things that I wanted to bring up. I went to one of the earlier presentations, and one of the major changes is the design storm has been upgraded from 1 inch to 1.3 inches, correct? Okay.
Yes. That is, and I'm so glad. I don't know if you want me to dive deeper into that. I can pause.
That's fine with me.
Okay, it represents the 90th percentile, which is pretty consistent regionally. EPA recommends the 95th, but we've never done that, and neither have the states around us. It's also consistent what the states around us are finding for updates. They're landing around the same range as well. It is a state average, so that's something to consider in your own site if you wanted to. And it was also, this is a really important aspect too, as we launched this project, I'm sure you've heard of this, the GC3, the Government Council on Climate Change, was actively reviewing this. And Denise was our key partner who really kept her eyes on the prize there for us, and helped us make sure we were being consistent with the route that GC3 effort was going in. And that update for climate change was a key recommendation from that outcome as well.
Thank you. I have to admit, I haven't read the whole thing cover to cover. There's a lot of pages in there, and you can get really lost in the hyperlinks, which has been very helpful. But I did read through the section on LID practices, and I was specifically interested in the separating distances between LID and septic systems, which I found confusion locally with some of the land use regulators, not understanding that there's differences in a drinking water watershed than other watersheds, and this clearly calls that out. I think that's really great. Do you recommend that local planning documents and wetland documents incorporate those distances to call it out clearly, so that there's not a lot of wasted time putting together plans that are not compliant with the recommendations?
I can jump in here. One of the things, I think there's a real opportunity with the two manuals, and all towns have to have an MS4 permit, or most towns, I should say, have an MS4 permit in Connecticut. And part of that MS4 permit is looking at, there's 6 steps to that, right? And it's looking at your land use regulations. So looking at these new manuals and looking at that MS4 permit, you can then update your inland wetlands and planning and zoning regulations to, adopt what's in the new manuals. So I think that that's a really good feature of this. And I think the opportunity for particularly inland wetland agencies, as well as planning and zoning, to do this is really important. It kind of, the MS4 permit goes that extra mile that maybe the land use regulations don't by themselves, but because of that, you can basically say, hey, we're directed by our MS4 permit to update our land use regulations to meet this. So I think that it's really important that way.
I'm curious.
I'll
if
just-
any, oh, go ahead.
Sure, I was just going to say, I'll just pipe in here too. Yeah, we do have in the MS4 permit, as Denise was just saying, requirements for towns to update their land use regulations. But a lot of towns already will just refer to the Stormwater Quality Manual, the ENS guidelines. So we kind of automatically, in many respects, update town regulations by updating these manuals. So the towns don't necessarily have to go in and say, okay, now we're going to change the water quality volume from 1 inch to 1.3. As long as they refer to the stormwater quality manual, they'll be doing that already. So it really kind of simplifies the process for the towns, and also makes it easier for the towns to have consistent requirements from town to town. So developers, projects that, you know, that may work in a number of different towns, you know, will find some degree of consistency from town to town.
Thank you, Chris.
Actually, just have a quick follow-up question on that. If towns do like specifically already state in their regulations or have that old equation for the water quality volume, even if they do refer to the stormwater quality as amended, if they specifically refer to the old equation with the 1 inch storm, does that would need to be updated?
Yeah,
Okay.
they'll need to update that, and your timing was perfect, Mary, because one of the other things I was going to say is, you know, we can include also, you know, the manual updates in our NEMO MS4 outreach. So, you know, obviously we consider you guys to be critical in getting the word out to the towns too. So we get some consistency there. The towns are already used to that channel. And we're really working to keep that continuing.
Excellent. Any other questions? Because I have more. I was really thrilled to see the streamside buffer recommendations that are asking for 100-foot no disturbance area, but those are recommendations, not regulations. If a town chose to want to make them regulations, would that be supported by DEEP, or is that still going to be something that's going to come up as a challenge?
You know, I don't think, you know, with the exception of the things that we actually put in the permit, we let the towns take their own direction. You know, an example of that would be wetland buffers. You know, different towns have different regulated areas, some as much as 200, 250 feet, some 50 feet. You know, we're not going to get into the town regulations in that regard, but in terms of kind of standard design guidelines, that's where, you know, we leave the towns their autonomy, but we kind of give them, you know, in some cases we'll give them a minimum standard, you know, have at least something like this. You know, for instance, in the construction permit, we have our solar appendix, which for solar developments has some buffer requirements in there. But in general, we kind of stay away from that, you know, except in cases where, you know, there's something that's kind of a universal requirement. But we let the towns, you know, the towns can still do their own thing, and they can make it a guidance. They can make it a, you know, a regulation, however they want to handle, as long as it's not inconsistent with what we're doing at DEEP.
Okay. Anybody else?
Gene, I think the thought there is that you can also, you know, if the towns do go the step further, they can make the regulations more stringent than DEEP by putting it in a regulatory process. But the important thing about the manual is that this is backup. So even though it doesn't say you have to do it, it's basically recommending that you do it. So now if you cite the manual and whatever, and then you cite things like climate change and low impact development and nature-based solutions and all of these terms that have been utilized as this is why we need to do this. You know, it's the idea from any land use regulation when you're doing that is documenting why you made the decision. Most land use decisions are turned over because towns don't properly document why they made the decision, and then it looks arbitrary. So one of the things with both of the manuals, the stormwater manual and the erosion sediment control manual, is it documents why we should be doing something, and using that as justification for what they're doing is really important in the land use process.
Thank you, Denise. Mark, did I
Jean?
see your hand go up?
Yeah, yes, hi. Kate, thank you for all the work you did on this. I know I was right there at the beginning when we started getting this project going. Denise, thank you so much for your involvement and activation, and to the whole team that worked on it. So yeah, I had a few questions. Well, let me just build on the most recent conversation that you guys were all having. So, you know, do you anticipate that there may be any potential impact of revising some portions of the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Act, you know, in the statutes? I know, you know, we as Chris Stone said, we want the towns to have enough autonomy to set their own standards and so forth. But I just wondered if there was any feeling that there might be a few things that have come out of this manual revision that might be put into statutes for revising the statutes.
I could just talk about what the nonprofit world is looking at. Well, first of all, let me just start with there's recommendations in the governor's climate change, the GC3 report. The wetlands unit said, would you please look at the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Act, as well as the Tidal Wetlands Act, and make sure that climate change is incorporated into those.
Right.
So that's a recommendation in the GC3 report. So we'll see how that moves forward. The Working in Natural Lands group has been working on this, and Rivers Alliance chaired the GC3 waters piece, and they're looking at you know, buffers and looking at legislation, working with the League of Conservation Voters. So we're waiting to see how we move that forward. There's been some language that has been put out this year, but how, you know, how it will, if it will be a separate piece of legislation or if it will be something amending the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Act, we're not sure, but buffers is in there. And I'm just going to throw in a third piece, is that we're really looking at source water protection. And source water protection, we can't do source water protection, protecting our public drinking water supplies without riparian buffers and without forested landscapes in those watersheds. Same thing for Long Island Sound, to be honest with you, whether when we're talking about water quality, but of critical importance is our public drinking water supplies. And I think you're going to be seeing more, a harder look at those particular watersheds, our public drinking water supply watersheds, as well as our aquifer protection areas.
Right. Follow-up question, in terms of next steps, for rolling out, you know, outreach to the towns, are you going to be producing a hard copy product to be able to, for towns to be able to purchase, or will it be an online kind of a thing? And then my second question is, will Yukon Clear maybe be involved with doing some training workshops on this in the future?
Yes, and yeah. So yes to the latter, and no to the first. This will be fully virtual. They're printable and they're printable in sections. So I hope that's still helpful if you need to print a piece. One of the goals that I'm still in progress on, because I didn't want to get the pursuit of perfection in the way of so much content I was hoping you would be able to review, is where the graphics are helpful for design to make them clickable so they could be printed on separately. That was some feedback we took from, I believe it was East Lyme. And then with regards to the training, that is next steps. We have a Long Island Sound Study grant, I think, which is one of the last ones you put in for us, Mark, that funded the NEMO program as a bridge, right? So we're going to start with an overview. We think we're still working out what the second one might be, and we're then from there we're still working on plans.
Great, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Well, Kathleen, I'm proud to be able to turn back over your life to you so you can make your next meeting at 10 o'clock. How many times did you give this presentation today?
This one is actually not what my next one is acidification, because we're doing, which if you're interested, and I'd love to tackle this group, we're making a 5-year plan for the Long Island Sound Study for sentinel monitoring and climate change.
Interesting, great. So we'll be listening for more information on that in the future.
Excellent. And I have some modeling tools I would love to share with you too when we're ready, that will take into account the cost. So if that's an aspect, since we did hear some of that, we'd love to share that too.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
We're always looking for someone for future meetings.
I'm too volunteery, so you can feel free to shut me down if you need to.
So again, thank you again to the team for giving the presentation and answering our questions. I will be sharing this recording through my newsletter. It'll be going up on our YouTube channel, and we'll hopefully get more people to be able to see it who couldn't make it today. So again, thank you, and I'm going to stop the recording.
Thank you, Jean. Take care.
Thank you.